In this snippet of a first-year undergraduate lecture, I'd like to briefly present some characteristics of the Socratic approach to philosophical investigation, as it is presented by Plato in his earlier Socratic dialogues. To do this, I will focus on one dialogue in particular, the Meno, and in the Meno on a few short passages from the very first pages of the dialogue. The Meno begins with a direct question, bluntly thrown at Socrates by the eponymous character of the dialogue's title, Meno. Meno asks Socrates, can virtue be taught? An apparently simple question. Note that both in English and in the Greek, the linguistic concision, and I'd say even the elegance in the economy of words, is striking. It has a rhetorical impressiveness, which in fact will be shown throughout the dialogue to be mere powder in your eyes. Part of why I'm saying it's a blunt and direct question is that it is a yes-no sort of question, the kind of question which waits for a similarly direct yes or no answer. So it is startling that that answer never materializes, because Socrates responds in the following way. He says, I am so far from knowing whether virtue can be taught or not, that I do not even have the slightest knowledge of what virtue is. What has Socrates just said? He's made, in fact, two central points. He's saying that in an apparently simple question, there is, on the one hand, two completely different issues at hand. On the one side, there's a question about whether something is teachable, and on the other, there's a question about what that something actually is. And related to this first element, there's a question of order between these two distinct members of the constituents of that question. Namely, there is an order of priority. The first question has to be what a thing is, and only after that can you maybe get to asking whether that thing is like this or like that, for example, teachable. Thus far, Socrates has uncovered or made explicit, we can say, hidden assumptions that Meno was possibly not even aware that he was making. Where for Meno there is no ambiguity in talking about virtue, he arete in Greek, Socrates reveals that Meno is in fact assuming there is such a thing and that it is easily identified. In Greek, this is subtly but solidly indicated by the force of the definite article, the he in he arete, where in English we use no article at all. In Greek, the definite article, the he, suggests the thing in question can be pointed to. That is to say, that it has a distinct silhouette identified by all. And indeed, later in the dialogue, the value of the article, I'd say even its ontological function, becomes a point of contention. And Socrates reveals how grammar has a decisive role not only in philosophy, but in the way we all try to correctly express the world around us. But that belongs to a later discussion. Before Socrates enters such details, here, at the start of the investigation, at the start of the dialogue, he merely, but also already, begins the work of disentangling hidden misunderstandings embedded in our use of language. If you talk flippantly of virtue as if it were something easily identified, you assume everyone in the conversation can do so. You assume, in other words, firstly, that there is something which exists. Then that thing is virtue. And also that thing, namely virtue, is the sort of thing which can or cannot have attributes, for instance, being teachable. So in effect, Socrates' response unpacks layers of complexity, which you wouldn't suspect lie beneath such linguistic simplicity and the seeming clarity of a yes-no question. And so, as often in Plato, the first step towards inquiry is clarifying linguistic usage and uncovering mystifications where no one suspected there were any mystifications. Now, there is a third aspect I would like to evoke. In addition to revealing the hidden assumptions in Meno's first question, Socrates also reinterprets the request as one directed at what he, Socrates, knows. In other words, Meno's yes-no question about the teachability of virtue is transformed into a question about knowledge, a question about what you know about the constituents of the original question. To drive this point home, Socrates rephrases his first analysis of Meno's question. He says, I am myself to blame for my not knowing anything at all about virtue. And since indeed I do not know what it is, how could I know what it is like? Now, we recognize the distinction between the two different questions which we already established, but we have also moved forward a little. The distinction has now crystallized under the auspices of a philosophical, technical jargon. We have now, on the one hand, a question about the what it is of a thing, and on the other side, we have the question of the what it is like of that thing. A distinction which opens doors to centuries of philosophical investigations into what is essential and what is accidental. A question which is just as crucial back then as it is nowadays, when we are asked constantly to like things without taking the time to identify what the things we like actually are. Socrates also rephrases the order of priority, this time in terms of logical necessity. Even if the precise terminology for conditionals is not yet set out in its rigidity here, we nevertheless can discern the mapping of an if-then sort of statement. That is to say, if I don't know the what it is of a thing, I can't possibly know the what it's like of that thing. There is, of course, much more to be said about that. But for now, I will only add a few words about the epistemic admonition on which this ontological analysis rests. Note the emphasis on ignorance from Socrates. It is his famous disavowal of knowledge. He is, after all, the man who knows nothing. The debate on the sincerity of Socrates' disavowal of knowledge is long and feisty, but here in the Meno, we have a good example of the middle path discussed by Gregory Vlastos, a monument in Socratic studies, who conciliates both interpretations of sincerity and irony in Socrates' claim to ignorance. Because here in the Meno, Socrates' insistence on his ignorance marks more of a revelation than an appeal to helplessness. If you want to answer a yes-no question, Socrates is telling us, then you have to know things. To begin with, you have to know what something is. And that, in a way, is easy enough to settle. That's why Socrates is very clear that he doesn't know what virtue is. And he adds, by the way, that he's yet to meet anyone who does. That is the first thing to know, whether you know the thing, the what it is of the thing, or not. That's the only way you can move forward in the inquiry. So the order of priority, which we evoked, and which commentators after Aristotle will relate to what they call the priority of definition, is framed here by Socrates as an order of priority of knowledge. There is a first thing you need to know, and you need to know that you know it. And if you know that you don't know it, you can't move on to the next stage, but you can focus on the fact that you don't know it. Why is this a revelation, a middle path? Well, because it sets out a methodology, a point A, which promises to lead you to a point B. In affirming, in other words, in affirming his ignorance, Socrates spurs on the inquiry, not only because he provokes his interlocutor, but at a deeper level because of the path that he sets out with a direction and a goal which injects urgency in the need to go forward. Thank you for your attention.